So yeah, mate. Obviously, we're talking about Plot Armour in Quantic Dream Games and Supermassive Games. So where did you want to start? Should we just go in with Detroit first?
Yeah, let's go for some Quantic Dream, right? So, I mean, if we look at when the characters can die, right? If we look at Detroit, Connor can die multiple times, but he always comes back, right? That is his thing. He's the hidden guy with the most plot armor. Marcus has to make it relatively till the end, kind of like the last third of the game, but he can die as early as the Freedom March. And then we have Kara, who can actually die as early as, like, the first, like, quarter of the game, which is pretty nuts to me. One that I actually thought was a really welcoming change. How about you?
I think that the way, because let's put it this way, Plot Armour in these games is basically inevitable, right? Unless you're going to ask a studio to spend like 2 decades making a choice-based game whereby every choice, every QTE leads to something different, it's just not realistic, right? I think the way Quantic Dream go about it is more clever. Like you said, obviously with Detroit Become Human, the plot involves androids and robots and things. So the idea that a character like Connor can keep coming back does make a lot of sense to me. Obviously, it's not satisfying in the sense of choices, but I think it's just a clever way to work around that issue of plot armor.
Connors does definitely make sense because he comes from Cyberlife. He's like the biggest and best prototype. They're going to keep reinstating him, aren't they? So from a story wise and kind of like story arc point of view, it makes sense. There's no plot holes really, is there? Of course, you can keep bringing like a Connor back while Marcus and Kara are kind of more on the run. So it wouldn't make sense to have it for them. Um, but yeah, like, I mean, if we go to say Heavy Rain though, I mean, the plot armor is done a little less cleverly because like obviously one of them's the killer. One of them has to get to the end, and it's just based on whether they can make it to the right location or not. And then the other two have to make it all the way to the end, but they can kind of die in the last like sort of fifth of the game. But obviously, you will play the full characters till pretty much the end of the game. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's done very cleverly. I do like the way Quantic Dream handle it, and I do think your point is very important. What you mentioned about how it is almost it's not feasible to ask these studios to make a game unless we do it like your dream supermassive game you made. The Arctic one where we could have a game supposedly maybe end early if you kill all the characters off. That is one way around it. But if you want to build a lengthy game where it does go through 10 or however many chapters, we are going to have to expect plot armor in some level, aren't we?
Yeah, and maybe it's me being a little bit guilty here of picking and choosing sort of like what works, in terms of plot armor, because like you say, with Heavy Rain, you are one of the playable characters is the killer, so naturally they do have to get towards the end. But again, what I think is really well done is because you're playing as the killer, obviously they're going to get to the end of the game, so they have plot armor, but you're making the things that you're doing as that character, you're not aware it's that he's got his own agenda to sort of like cover up the evidence of like the crimes that he's been involved in. So maybe in future playthroughs you're going to be more rewarded from going back and playing as that character, because you're going to pick things up like, oh, hang on a minute, like him doing that, him saying that, I now understand why he's doing that, because it's not because he's doing like anything moral or good. It's because he wants to cover up the crimes that he's committed. I think coming back to like Detroit Become Human with Marcus, obviously that is the backbone of that story is about the revolution of the androids. So he had to make it some way through the story because otherwise the story would collapse in itself. But again, like they juxtapose that brilliantly with say Kara, and this is where I think the branching is so fantastic in these games. The fact that she can die as early as she does, and not have any plot armor, but also the fact that she can go on and have 3 different endings, whether it's at the bus station, whether it's the boat scene that you told me about, or the concentration camp. Like just the amount of like care and time that it was given to her and it literally could be wasted if someone failed that fight scene with Todd. So I think it's the way that they go about it. Obviously, they take more time with their games. It is absolutely fantastic. I mean, mate, did we now want to almost compare that against Supermassive games?
Of course, yeah. So, like, obviously, it's the same as every game, but, like, with the Supermassive games, you're always going to have someone who's either Mr. or Mrs. Plot Armor who has to make it to at least Chapter 10. So, whether it's The Quarry with Caitlin, whether it's Until Dawn with Sam and Mike, whether it's The Devil in Me with Mr. Mark Nestor, there's always going to be someone that has to make it to the very end of the game. Now, there's no sort of story reason why this happens. It's just the way it has to be. So that's already something Quantic Dream have one up on it. If we look at, say, Until Dawn with Mr. Michael Monroe, it is a bit gutting where you find out the guy can't die. So if you was to replay Until Dawn, like you can literally go through all the sanatorium scenes, failing every quick time event, and it won't matter other than maybe, killing your dog companion who you might have by your side. So yeah, I guess a question to you, mate, is, should we kind of judge it from a blind playthrough point of view? Because I think a big part of this whole Plot Armor argument really comes into, and it really bleeds into, replayability value.
Yeah, the blind playthrough is the golden playthrough, right? Because anything is possible. You're not aware of the plot armor and the moments where you can't fuck up, essentially. But then they are builders' choice-based games, so I suppose you have to judge them on, their merits for being able to branch the stories. And I think, you're absolutely spot on with Mike in Until Dawn. Like, that whole sanatorium thing, it can come across as a bit of a drag now. I think, honestly, comparing that to, say, what I was saying before about the killer in Heavy Rain, you can replay them scenes and at least you can get satisfaction from it because you can still be learning things. Because, obviously what his true agenda is, or, hidden agenda. But obviously with Mike in Until Dawn, you're literally just playing it to get him to the end. I think just to balance the argument a little bit, obviously they do well, I think, in The Devil in Me with the whole ultimatum ending, because, he does have plot armor, Mark, and it is actually a shame that it's really only through him and Kate that you can get that ending, because I think to be able to demonstrate that more as that ending to people would actually be just a great way to show the branchability and the different things that they've put in to make that so satisfying at the end of the game. So yeah, it's tough to call, right? Because on paper I'd say that Quantic Dream, at least so far, have been better in executing branches in choice-based games, but they don't put stuff out so often. So Supermassive remains my favourite developer because we've just got more content to enjoy, and obviously there's they do have choices within them. It's not like it's plot armor all the way through. So yeah, it's a bit of a conundrum, mate. Like, you have to find that middle ground, I guess, because you lean one way, say, like, I don't know, a game I've played, it's Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, right? I might do a review of it on this channel, but there's no real choices in it at all, right? That's one extreme. And then the other extreme we've yet to see, because it would take so much time for a developer to put a game together. So,
as I say, I think it really goes to prove that it really depends on the length of time these developers put into a game. Because if we look at another studio, for example, Telltale, where they were making 2-3 games a year, it's so linear that plot armor's everywhere. But if you look at, say, Quantic Dream, who will spend 5 or more years making a game, they can really get around it. And even then, plot armor is still a thing. And I feel like it's really tough to get around it, like you mentioned. I feel if we had a total plot armor free game, it might actually run the risk of being a bad game, or, having to be a game that you might just have to accept that, you might die in chapter 4 and then, you can't you just didn't get to play the whole game, which still might be really cool from a replayability sense. But yeah, I think that's where we're standing, right?
Yeah, and you know what? To go that way, to have a game where there's, you know, infinite choices, players might find that quite overwhelming. So in a way, they might judge it a bad game because they're like, God no, like I don't want to have to screw up every little thing or like find every little path here. So having that, you know, almost like as a weird analogy, if you like look at it like a rib cage, you've got like the main bone running through the middle. That's like the main story. You've got like these other bones coming off it, and they're like the, you know, the sort of the branches, if you will. That's perhaps the best way to do it, and that's what we're judging it on. But it's quite a good discussion, because I mean, I'm still going to say that I think Quantic Dream have done it better, because they've got plot armor in the game, but they've used it in such a way that I deem it more clever. Whereas perhaps what you can level at Supermassive is that, you know, you just know that there's going to be a couple of characters that they've randomly got plot armor, like, and that is the explanation to it.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add really is that I reckon Detroit Become Human did it better than Heavy Rain, and I reckon The Quarry arguably did it better than Until Dawn. So it is almost like these studios are actually getting better at it, and that just makes me even more excited to see what Star Wars Eclipse are going to pull out the bag. That could be nuts. And it also makes me really curious as to like how well Supermassive Games' next blockbuster, or even Directive 8020, are going to handle it, because you know, at this rate it looks like we are going to get better kind of, you know, handling of the plot armor phenomenon.
Sweet as. I mean, we'll wrap it up there, mate, unless you've got anything else to add.
Nah, just obviously guys, let us know which game you thought was the best at handling plot armor, and maybe like pitch some suggestions how you reckon these developers can get around the whole plot armor conundrum.
Fantastic. All right, thanks for watching the video, guys. We'll see you next time.
See you in the next one, guys. Take care.